chatting all about routines and procedures that you should have in your music room. Routines and procedures will make your life so much easier as a music teacher. There's likely already some routines and procedures that are set out for you by your school and your district, such as fire drills, lockdowns, things like that. But as a music teacher, you also need to come up with your own routines and procedures to just help your class run smoothly and help it to run the way you would like it. So in this video, I am going to chat with you all about what routines and procedures I suggest you start to think about for your classroom. And I'm also going to tell you what I do and how I handle that routine and procedure in my music room. So let's jump right on in. The first routine and procedure that you want to think about for your music room is what are your rules and your expectations for your music room, and how are you going to hold your students accountable for those rules and expectations? In my classroom, I have 5 big rules. Be respectful, be responsible, be ready, be a participant, and make good choices. I teach those rules to my students right at the beginning of the school year using the rhythms of the word. So on my board, and you can also find these in my Teacher Pay Teacher shop, I have cards that say the rules. So one might be respectful, and then we'll just echo those back and forth. And then I'll also talk about with my students, how do we show that we are respectful in the music room? What does being a respectful musician look like? What does being a respectful friend look like? All of those different things and how they apply to the music room. And pretty much every day for at least the first month of school, I will go with my students, be respectful, be responsible, all of those things. And I also often will just bring them back every once in a while, and we'll do them with clapping. We'll put rhythm sticks with them. We'll use different voice types. Finding a way to teach your rules is the first routine that I would suggest you find. Now, along with that, you also need to figure out how you are going to hold your students accountable for following the rules. So in my classroom, my students have what I call conduct yourself accordingly. And each class has a paper piano that they are working their way up by showing proper music etiquette, music behavior, all of those things. Now, how I keep track of them showing me the proper music etiquette and behavior is on every day. I start with the letters of music on my board for each class. So M-U-S-I-C, music. If they are able to keep the 5 letters of music, they move up 3 notes on the piano keyboard. If they keep 4, they move up 2. If they keep 3, they move up 1. And if they keep less than 3, they don't get to move up on the piano. So keeping those, in order for students to keep those letters, they need to be showing me be respectful, be responsible, make good choices, be ready, and be a participant. When they show me those things, the letters stay up. If they start to not show me, the letters come down. Then on the piano, so at the end of class, they either move at 3, 2, or 1. Once at the end of the month, however many they have moved up the piano equals an amount of game time that they will get of games of their choice. So if they move up 7 keys, they get 7 minutes. If they move up 10, they get 10 minutes. That's how I reward their good behavior, and that's my routine for how I introduce the rules and how I manage behaviors in my classroom. The next one that you will want to think about is how students exit and enter the room. And now these might not always be the same every time the students come into your room. I have about 3 different ways that they either exit and enter the room. The first way is I start them in their line. They line up on the hallway and they follow me and they walk behind me so that we make a circle. And I just keep walking and walking and walking until they're in a circle, until they're walking quietly in that circle. And they know that that's the expectation. When we walk in a circle, we walk until we're quiet. When they're quiet, they sit down and we get on with the activity. That's way 1. Way 2 that I'll have them enter their room is enter and go right to their music spots, which is on my carpet. They know where their music spots are. At the beginning of the year, I always have the seating chart up on the board for them to look at. So I'll go to the hallway, greet them, say, okay, go in and go to your music spots. And they know to go to their music spots. The other way that I will sometimes have them enter is I will again meet them at the door and I will say, okay, go and choose a smart spot for your learning on the tile. And then they will go and choose a spot on the tile. Now I use these different entrance strategies for different things in my classroom, different activities. If I'm starting with a game, I will often have them walk around and sit in a circle. If I am starting with some type of free movement or follow me movement, I will tell them to go and pick a spot on the tile. And if I'm starting with a teaching activity, I will have them come and sit on the carpet. So there's the different ways that they can come into the room. I don't necessarily expect them to come in quietly, but I'll do something when they're in the room to get them to quiet down. So like when they walk in a circle, they just walk and we walk in a circle until we stop. The circle one is what I use most often with my K1-2s, and most often with my 3-4-5s, I will have them go and sit right at their music spots to start the day. Now exiting, they always exit the same way. They line up against the far wall, and then they just go when their teacher comes to pick them up. We talk about staying in your spot. Lots of my teachers, actually pretty much all of them, especially K-4, will have a line leader, some will have a caboose, so those people I'll usually ask to line up, and then everyone else just lines up in between. Another routine that you will likely want to think about is, how do you expect your students to sit in the music room? Do you expect them to sit crisscross applesauce all the time? Can they sit on their knees? Can they sit out with their legs in front of them? How do you want them to sit? For me, I give them the option between sitting crisscross applesauce or on their knees, whatever is most comfortable for them. I do not let them lie down unless I give them the option when we're listening to music, and I do not let them sit with their legs out flailed in front of them, because that's a tripping hazard. So that was a big one for me to overcome this past year, is the routine of, this is how we sit in the music room. You have two options: you sit crisscross or you sit on your knees. And I also make sure that I include lots of movement and lots of times for them to move so that they don't get cramped up in their sitting position. Another thing to think about is, how will your students get supplies? This includes both instruments, pencils, erasers, markers. How are you going to manage that in your classroom? I have a few different ways depending on what they're getting. What often works the best for me is, I will have a few student helpers for a day, and I will have them hand out things. So for handing out papers, I'll pick 2 student helpers, and they'll hand out the papers and the pencils. If it's something like we're doing a color by note or a composition, and they need scissors and glue and markers, then I'll call them row by row, and I have everything set up on the side, and I tell them exactly what they need to get. With markers, I often tell my students not to take more than 3, because I don't have enough for them all to have a complete set. With instruments, I always hand them out, especially if they're like rhythm sticks, egg shakers, all of those things. I give them directly to students, because then it just alleviates problems of, I wanted the pink egg shaker, I wanted the blue rhythm sticks. I just give them, I tell them you get what you get, and you don't get upset, and that's how we deal with that. Now, bigger instruments such as my Orff instruments and my drums, I often have them set up in the tile part of my classroom, and I will just send students to them based on either what they have or have not had a turn with, who they can sit by. There's some students that I know will do better on things, the smaller instruments. They get on the bigger Orff instruments and they just lose track of what they're doing. So all of those different things are things that I consider. So when it's things like supplies, as in pencils, papers, markers, glue, I let the students take care of that themselves. When it's instruments, I assign those and hand those out, just so that I have a little bit more control over the situation. Another supply to think about with handing out is student duotangs. I have all of my students work in a student duotang. That's how I store my student work. There's a few different ways that I've gone about handing them out. If I need students to have their duotang right at the beginning of the class, I'll have the duotang with me at the door when I greet students, and I'll call students in based on the order of their duotangs, and they'll go sit at their music spot. If I'm using the duotang sometime throughout the class, I'll often just have students hand them out and distribute them that way. Another thing that you should think about in your classroom, and this kind of goes along with your lesson planning sequence, is how will students transition from one activity to another? So if you start them in a circle playing a game, how will they transition to learning the new solfege of the day? How will they transition to doing different rhythms? This is something new that I'm going to do this year, and that's the magic music word. I got the idea from Mrs. Munchkins, and she uses it in her general classroom, and I'm going to bring it into the music room so that I can explain an activity to the students. So say I'm explaining, we've just finished playing a game, and I need them to go to the carpet and grab a pencil and a piece of paper off the stand. I'll explain that to them, and then you'll use our magic music word to move them to the next activity. Another thing to consider is it easiest to have students come into your classroom and do a whole group activity, or is it easier to send them into groups? All of those different transition things, and making transitions as smooth and as clear as possible for the students, so that there's not a chance for them to cause issues or become a behavior problem because they know exactly what they're going to do. That's going to be completely different depending on your different space. I've talked about the different spaces that I have in my classroom for different activities. It's going to depend on what you like to teach and how you like to teach and all of those different things. But thinking of a way to help smooth out your transitions in your classroom will also be super useful. Next would be a way for how are your students going to ask you for things? How are they going to tell you that they need to go to the bathroom? How are they going to tell you that they didn't get a paper? I use pretty simple things in my classroom. I have a bathroom light, and my students know that they can go to the bathroom if that light is off. So whenever that light is off, they can just go, turn the light on, and go to the bathroom. If the light is on, either because another student is in the bathroom or I have turned it on because I need them all in the classroom with me, they know that they cannot go to the bathroom. Other things that they need from me, I just have my students raise my hand and I will get to them as I get to them. Another routine and expectation that you'll want to sort out ASAP in your classroom is the expectations for playing instruments. Mine is pretty simple and it is not my idea. I know Becca from Becca's Music Room uses and Mrs. King's classroom. I've seen this all over the place, but it's great and my students know it and they know the expectation. And that is, if you play before I say, your instrument will be taken away. It's simple. They know right away, and I start them right off in kindergarten that if you play before I say, your instrument's taken away, and you have to follow through with whatever your expectation is going to be. So there's times in my first kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 5 music classes that someone will play their instrument and I'll either take their instrument away, their mallets away, and there's been times when we've been on mallet instruments that I've taken the mallets away and have had to take the instrument away because then students start using their fingers. So thinking of a routine, a rule, an expectation for how students will play instruments in your classroom is crucial, or else you will have students playing instruments all the time whenever they feel like it, and you will never get a word in edgewise. So that is another great routine and rule to think about now, and think about it before you're in the classroom with your students and using instruments, because it's a very hard behavior to correct once they've been given the opportunity to get away with not using instruments appropriately. The last thing that I want to talk about is student volunteers. This is not something that I'm super great at keeping track of, and it's something that I hope to be better at keeping track of, but having a routine and procedure for how you keep track of student volunteers. Like I said, I'm not super great at this. I think this year what I'm going to do is in each of their seating plan charts, I'm going to put a little sticky note on who my student volunteer is and just move them for each class. I know often teachers have student volunteers chosen for them. I prefer not to use the same volunteer as this classroom teacher has, because then kids will get skipped over. So I think my plan this year is I'm going to get one of those like clear, translucent Post-it notes and just keep track of my student volunteers that way. So move them each class, and that'll be the student that I ask to be my student volunteer and help me with whatever I need help. So those are all of the procedures and routines that I think about in my music classroom. Those are the primary ones. There's lots of different ones that you might come across and you might just have to figure out as you get started. But those ones are the most essential, I believe, for my classroom and how I organize my classroom and things that I work on teaching my students on day one of school. My entire first month of school this year, I'm going to try to have it teaching routines and procedures and doing a whole bunch of different activities so that they can practice those different routines and procedures. So if you found this video useful or helpful, make sure that you like, subscribe, and share so that other people can find it and get the useful information as well. And until next time, I'll see you later. Bye.